Hey guys, it's great to see you again. In this lecture, we'll take a serious look at best coding practices, as well as modifying the code logic a little bit. Let's run the app to see what we've done so far. Alright, in the SignUp view controller, right now the SignUp button is still active even if users haven't touched anything. This is not desirable, as the button should be inactive at this time. What we've done so far is to disable this button if we don't like the input so far, after the users touch the text fields. We check if we like the input so far in the text field did change method, then disable the button if needed. It's not so hard to fix this problem, as initially the text fields are blank anyway, there's no need to do a check on them. At this point, we simply disable the SignUp button right after the view is launched. Alright, let's see if this works. Right. Okay. Alright, let's see. Great, I can't touch the button. The button is still disabled after we start editing the text fields. It's only active when we like the input enough. Okay, good. The rest will now be taken care of by Firebase. Similarly, we'll strengthen our sign-in form. Alright, previously we used the text field did change of the SignUp view controller here. Although Xcode can clear the ambiguity, we should use this method of the sign-in view controller. Alright, similar to the SignUp view, we'll disable the sign-in button after the view launched, before performing any text field checking stuff. Okay, good. If you run the app now, it'll work fine. However, to save time, we'll skip it for now. Now, let's start talking about best coding practices. We actually touched it a little bit before by factoring a big function into small unit functions to make the code more intuitive and readable. Another fundamental coding practice is to limit repetition. Now, for certain tasks like authentication or database tasks, if we need to use it over and over in many different view controllers, it might not be a good idea to implement the same method in many view controllers. One way is to implement those methods in a central place, then use them whenever we want. A good way is to group related functions into a single class. For example, let's create a new Swift file and name it AuthService. In this file, we'll create a class whose methods handle Firebase authentication stuff. It's a common practice to name the class the same as the file name. As an example, let's move the sign-in and switching view method in the sign-in view controller to this class. We'll make this a snippet method of this new class. Say, the sign-in method. Okay. This method of the new class will handle the sign-in stuff for our app. As usual, before getting any fancy stuff, we need to make sure things hook up nicely. In particular, we first need to know how to call this method in the sign-in view controller. Of course, we need to call it in this sign-in button method. But hopefully, no one would go ahead and call this method directly on the AuthService class. Alright. This is basic, and we just mention it for completeness. Our sign-in method is an instance method, so we can't call it directly on the corresponding class. Alright? To call this method, we need to create an instance of this class, then call the method on this instance. Okay, this is our new class. If we declare a method like this without saying anything else, it's an instance method and must be called on an instance of this class. If we want it to be a class method, we need to explicitly say so. Alright, so to call this method, simply initialize an instance of the class. So let's create a constant named, alright, let's choose something meaningful like instance auth service or things like that. Then assign it a newly initialized instance of the auth service class. Now simply call the sign-in method on this instance. Things should work smoothly, but let's print something out from this method to make our life a little bit easier. Anything works like sign in. Alright, Let's run the app to see if we are able to call this method in the SignIn view controller. All right. Okay, let's see. Actually, we need to enable our sign-in button first. Now, click the button. Okay, good. We can now call this method by creating an instance of the new method. Now, if you notice, we need to create a new instance each time we need to use the method. It doesn't matter in this case because users would rarely hit the sign-in button. However, in many other features, such as posting or messaging, creating a new instance of some class each time we need to create a new post is not a good idea. That's very inefficient in terms of memory and processing and other things. To overcome this issue, we can create a shared instance of the class and call the instance methods anytime we want during the app life cycle. We define this instance property using the static keyword. It's an instance variable of the class, which is assigned an object of the class. Alright, so we create an object of the class, then assign it to this instance variable named shared. The static keyword means that instance will only be created once. Created once means that this instance will be created the first time we ask for it. Then, the next time we ask for an instance of the method using this property, the same instance will be used, instead of creating a new one as before. This is due to the static keyword we use in the declaration of this property. In short, shared here is a property of the auth-service class, which happens to be an instance of the class that is created one time only. Now, to use this static property, let's delete this old stuff. We've been using it for a while. First, simply create this shared instance, using the syntax similar to when we access a property of the class. Now, we have this instance. We'll use it to call the instance method that we want. In this case, we'll call the SignIn method. Alright, great. This should work nicely. Let's run the app and see. By the way, it doesn't matter in this case if we use this way or the previous one. Okay, it should work fine. SignIn here is an instance method, and we're calling it on an instance of the class. The only difference to previous approach is this is a static property. Next time we want to use it to call some methods of the class, the same instance will be used. Alright, let's check it out. Let's first enable our sign-in button. Okay, tap the button. Great, it's working beautifully. The advantage of using shared instances will become clearer later, when we start building other features. We can create a shared instance once, then use it to call instance methods of the corresponding class anywhere we want, anytime we want, without needing to create a new instance over and over again. In fact, using a shared instance in this case is unnecessary. If it's not necessary, we probably don't need to use it. Here is a case in which using the shared instance is useful. Let's say this is a class handling storage stuff, and this is a shared instance named storage root ref. Let's say we instantiate it in such a way that it holds the root reference to our storage, which is this one. Let's say we do that by using an initializer of some class named storage root. Again, suppose after this initialization, this shared instance holds the reference to our root reference. Then, this makes working with storage very convenient. Alright? Recall this if we want to push or retrieve media files to or from the storage. We'll have to access the root reference of the storage of our project. Okay? In our app, this pushing and retrieving storage data task is performed extremely frequently. So, it's a pain to request this storage root reference each time we perform that task. Using the root ref shared instance like this, that storage root reference will be acquired once, and then can be used during the whole life cycle of the app. If we then want to push or retrieve data, we can then perform corresponding methods on this instance to access the child nodes of this root reference. This makes working with the storage highly convenient. So, this is a case in which using shared instances offers lots of advantages. For our auth service class, it might be overkill to use the shared instance. Actually, let's delete this stuff. Okay, for our authentication stuff, there is a more efficient way to perform authentication tasks than using instance methods. In fact, we can use class method to perform these tasks directly on the class itself, using the static keyword making this SignIn method a class of a type or a type method. This means we can call it directly on the class itself without ever needing to create an instance of the class. So now, in the SignIn view controller, we simply call this method using the auth service class. Okay. Let's delete the old stuff, because we're not using the shared instance anymore. Alright, the central idea for what we've been doing is that we turn common methods used by many view controllers into helper methods to make the view controllers simpler. This reduces repetition and makes the code more flexible and readable. Alright, let's check out the SignIn button now. Alright, good. It's working great. In short, this is useful when we want to group together some related and common methods. Kind of like helper methods, which can be used by many view controllers across our apps. Alright, now things hook up nicely. Let's get back to our real stuff. This SignIn method helps us to authenticate users and perform a SignU from the SignIn view controller to the tab bar controller. We also need to import the Firebase auth package to use the Firebase authentication tools. Okay, the email text field content belongs to the SignIn view controller, so we can't access it here. Instead, we need a corresponding parameter so that we can input the text field content when calling this method. We'll call this string parameter email. Similarly, we need a string parameter. Let's name it password. Okay, that's all. We don't need any other parameters. We then use these parameters in the function's body instead. We'll need to fix the self stuff below shortly. Alright, now, when calling this method in the SignIn view controller, we'll inject the text field content into these parameters. Okay, let's type the method again to see the suggestion. Xcode probably hasn't been able to catch up with us. Perhaps we can just run the app so that Xcode can update the changes we've just made. Alright, let's see. Alright, good. We now see the updated SignIn method. We can now simply inject the text content of the email and password text fields into the corresponding parameters. Note that we can safely unwrap these things because we eliminate blank inputs already. Alright, now, let's get rid of the SignU stuff in here. Ideally, we want to do authentication business in this auth service. So let's move this command out of this class. As before, the idea now is to only switch view after the authentication process succeeded. However, we need to know if the authentication process succeeds or fails. Right now, in the SignIn method, if authentication process fails, we print the error, then escape from the method. That's alone not really helpful. We're going to make this SignIn method at least be able to let the outside world know about the authentication process status. We can do that using callbacks. When we finished authenticating users, we can then pass subsequent tasks into the SignIn method via this OnSuccess Closure that we'll define later. For example, if we want to perform SignU and stuff, we can pass that job via a closure parameter of the SignIn method, then call it in the Firebase Authentication Completion Closure. This parameter we'll call OnSuccess. So let's define another parameter of the SignIn method named OnSuccess. Okay. Alright. It's simply an input of the SignIn method, which happens to be a closure. For now, let's say this closure doesn't require any input and returns nothing. This simply means the SignIn method now has an extra parameter, and it will be called in the completion closure where the authentication finishes. Normally, this closure would be called before the SignIn method returned. However, in this case, it would potentially be called after the SignIn method returned. That's why we need to use this @escaping stuff. This simply means we tell the compile that this OnSuccess Closure should be allowed to be called after the SignIn method returned. Without this @escaping keyword, this closure argument of the SignIn method can only be called inside the method. So now we defined a closure argument of the SignIn method, which will be called after the authentication process finishes. We can now pass any job we want to do via this parameter. Let's type this SignIn method again to see if Xcode updated the change. Okay, it hasn't. Let's just reload the project. Alright, let's see. Good, this is our new sign-in declaration. The first two parameters will be the same as before, which are the content of the email and password text fields. Alright, now we can perform any task we want. This task will be performed after the authentication process succeeds. This is because in the implementation, we performed the input closure after the signing in process succeeded. Now, this is a closure, so we're going to need to use curly brackets. Alright. Okay. Now, in here, we perform whatever we want to do after the signing process succeeded. For simplicity, let's just print something out for now. Like, you can print whatever you want, but we're just going to print OnSuccess. Alright, good. Now, let's comment the SignUp stuff. We'll move it into this closure later. Okay. Alright, let's see. Let's first confirm that this closure can only be called if the sign-in process succeeded. If we sign in using a bad account, Firebase will complain. The authentication process failed, so the closure didn't get called as the sign-in method returned. This can easily be seen in the body of the sign-in method of the auth service class. Now, if we use a good account to sign in, if things went well, the authentication process will be successful. The closure argument will be invoked and print out the OnSuccess string. Alright, note that although the sign-in process was successful, the view didn't switch. It's because we commented out the performing SignUp line. Now we can simply move the perform SignUp method into the OnSuccess Closure. Let's delete this print command. If we move this perform SignUp method into the OnSuccess Closure, the view will only be switched after we're very sure that the user was successfully authenticated, which is, great. By the way, last time we tested the app, we signed in without logging out. So now we'll be logged in automatically. All right. We can just log out to test the app. Now let's log in using a good account. All right, hit the button. Fantastic. Pretty great, right? Okay, let's see. This is good already, but it would be much better if we can report the error to the outside world. Right now, the Firebase sign-in error only exists inside the scope of the sign-in method of the auth service class. Our plan now is to use an escaping closure to make it visible to the outside world. So let's insert another parameter to this sign-in method. Say OnError. Similar to the success case, we'll use an escaping closure, which requires no input and returns nothing. Alright, good. Now, simply call this closure after the Firebase sign-in process failed. We'll see how to bring the error outside shortly. Alright. For now, let's call this sign-in method accordingly. This is the old sign-in method. Let's rewrite this function call. Xcode probably hasn't caught up with us yet. Yeah, right. We should run the app to update the change. Now we see the new version of the SignIn method. The first 3 inputs will just be the same. So let's occupy them over. Let's copy them over. The OnSuccess parameter is a closure, so we use curly brackets. All right. We'll move the SignUp stuff into these curly brackets. Okay. The OnError parameter is also a closure, so we need to use curly brackets too. All right, good. Let's arrange things a little bit. Okay, now, call the perform SignUp method inside the OnSuccess closure, then delete the old stuff. All right, let's run the app and see. There's an error because we forgot to unwrap the email text. All right, now try again. We haven't done anything interesting yet with this new closure argument. Okay, it works. We just want to see if things hook up fine. Now, let's see if we can expose the error from inside the SignIn method. As the OnError Closure might be called after the SignIn method returned, our idea is to make the error string an input of this escaping closure. So let's make this closure accept a string input named, say, error message, which is of type optional string. Okay, we might have some errors for now. This is a function parameter, so we should use the underscore for its argument. Okay. This is a new Swift 3 syntax. Alright, the OnError Closure call now needs an input. We're going to let the error description string be this argument. That way, we can decide what to do with this error string when we call the SignIn method elsewhere. Actually, let's copy over the error description. Alright, string argument is not the only choice here. You can actually use the NSError, which is the same type as the error returned by Firebase. Simply change optional string to something else that you want. Alright, we don't need to name the argument, and in the body, simply call the closure with the error itself. Alright. Okay, now we need to modify the function call accordingly. The OnError Closure now requires an input. Now, as we declared optional string for its argument, we can just leave the input blank like this. Otherwise, if you want to do something with the error string returned by Firebase, you can use an argument name here. Anything works as long as it's a valid name. Actually, this is a bit confusing. Let's just use error string or even error. Alright. For simplicity, let's just print out this error string here. We need to unwrap it actually because we declared that the error input of the closure is optional string. You can see that in the function body. That error we used is actually the input of the closure, which is exactly the error description we used when the closure was called. Alright. Okay, let's see if we're missing anything. Actually, we're good. Let's just run the app and see. The output will be the same, but the code is much more flexible now. If you want to do anything with the error, you don't need to modify this helper class. Okay, let's test this. Let's log in using a bad email to see things still work smoothly after we factored the code. If we see the error being printed out, then we're good. Alright, now touch the button. Great. We're able to print out the error string returned from Firebase. This is due to the print command in the closure when we call the SignIn method. The error here is the error string that got returned from Firebase in the auth service class. This is a great coding practice. If you wrote this auth service class and let others use it, they can do anything with the error without needing to access the API. This is how we've been using Firebase, by the way. Now let's do the same thing for SignUp. As before, we'll implement SignUp stuff in the auth service class. It's going to be similar to the SignIn stuff. So let's copy the SignIn method over and modify it accordingly. Instead of SignIn, we now name it SignUp. we still have email and password parameters. For signing up, we also need a username, which is a string. All right, great. Now move the detail signup implementation in the signup view controller into this signup method of the auth service. Okay. In this method, we use a small function named setUserInformation. So we need that in the auth service class too. As usual, we'll need to modify the function body a little bit. We use the email parameter instead of the email text field content, and do the same thing for the password parameter. Next, we'll need Firebase storage and Firebase database packages because we are using their tools to store and sync data. All right, import the Firebase database too. Okay, good. Let's see. There are a few things that shouldn't be here. Okay. This selected image is a property of the signup view controller, and the perform SignU function is an instance method of the signup view controller. So we'll need to move them outside and use them via parameters of the signup method. Option click the signup view controller to open it in an assistant editor. Now, copy over this if statement in which we try to extract the image data from the chosen photo from the signup view. The idea is after users touch the signup button, this if statement will extract the image data from the photo library that users pick from the photo library. Then inject this image data into the auth service signup method to store it on Firebase storage. So, first, let's delete this if command in this if command in the signup method. Don't forget to get rid of redundant curly brackets. All right, now we need this image data from some parameter. We'll inject the image data from the signup view controller into this signup method via that parameter. All right, so now define a new parameter of this signup method. Name, say, image data. It should be of type data to match the type of the image data in the signup view controller. All right. There's still a few more things here and there that we need to modify. Use username parameter instead of the username text field content. We do that for the email too. We'll inject those text field content into this signup method via those parameters in the signup view controller shortly. Okay. There are still a few more errors. Let's see. Actually, let's run the app to see all of the errors. Okay. There's a redundant curly bracket at the bottom of the file. Let's get rid of it. Okay. Okay, we're almost done. This is the danger of copy and paste type of programming. Okay. Xcode doesn't seem to recognize the setUserInformation method. Oh yeah, we found the problem. This method should not be an instance method. It should be a class method. It's because self here refers to the auth service class, not an instance of the class. Because self is the class itself, the setUserInformation must be a class method for us to call it on the class. Alright, that's good. The only thing left is to move the SignU stuff to the signup view controller. Before that, let's call this auth service signup method when the signup button is touched. Okay. It's a class method, so it can be called directly on the auth service class. We use the username text field string for the username parameter, the email text field content for the email parameter, the password field text field content for the password parameter. Okay. All right. Good. The image data will be what is extracted from the selected image. Okay. Now, after the signup process succeeded, we do anything we want in the OnSuccess Closure. We'll switch from the signup to the tab bar as before. All right. For the OnError Closure, we can simply report the Firebase error string as before. You can name this parameter anything you like as long as it's valid and should follow naming convention. For simplicity, we're just going to print out the error. All right. Let's run the app and see. Okay. There's no bug, but we forgot something important. We haven't called these escaping closures in the SignUp method. Let's start with OnError first because it's simpler. We can just copy over the function call from the SignIn method to replace the print command where we reported the error string. For OnSuccess, we need to call it after the very end of the authentication process, which is after we successfully store the new user to the database. However, this is more like an auxiliary function, which we factored from the SignUp method. So we need to pass it to this function via an escaping closure parameter. All right, good. Now we can simply inject the OnSuccess argument of the SignUp method into this function via the new parameter. The flow is from the argument of the SignUp method to the new parameter of the setUserInformation method. All right, sounds good. So when calling the setUserInformation method for its OnSuccess parameter, we inject the OnSuccess argument of the SignUp method. All right, great. Let's build the app to see if there's any error. All right, good. Now we can check out the app. The functionality would be the same, but the code is much more flexible now. Okay. All right, here it is. Let's test the sign up feature. Let's choose a profile photo that inputs some new information. That makes Firebase happy. The objective is to make the sign up process succeed. So let's say the username is testuser. The username is testuser@gmail.com. The password is 123456, then sign up. Notice that the view will only switch after the sign up process succeeds, thanks to the escaping closure. Okay, here's our new user on the database. Great. Now the app works fine and the code is flexible. Let's see if there's tiny things here and there we need to clean up. All right, let's fix this annoying warning. Okay, this error string is in fact an optional. We need to unwrap it as we did in the SignIn method. In the SignUp method, we indeed declared that the error string should be optional. So let's build the app again to see if there's anything else we need to take care of. Okay, our code is now much more readable and flexible. If later on you want to change the presentation, like report errors to users, you don't ever need to touch the authentication part. Everything can be performed in this OnError Closure. By the way, for completeness, let's do something when there is no profile photo. That means if users didn't choose a profile photo, let's do something to report that. For simplicity, here we're just going to print something out. All right. The way we code this sign up button implies that we don't allow blank profile photos. Instead of printing, you can report this message to the users. Okay, let's see if there's anything else. Oh yeah, the code looks a bit off, like indentation and stuff. Here's a great tip to fix this issue. Instead of fixing the code line by line, we can do it all at once by Command A to select everything. Right-click, then choose Reindent under Structure. Alright, things look much nicer now. Similarly, we can also do that to the SignIn view controller and the auth service Swift file. Okay. Now, before ending the lecture, let's do one more factorization. You can see that it's very inconvenient to leave this fix link all over the place like this. So this makes it very hard to change or keep track. A great way to deal with this is to put all this stuff in a convenient place. In particular, we can put them in a Swift file, named like config. Alright, good. In this file, we'll define a structure with the same name as the file, and store those fixed URLs in here. Note that you can just use class here, but for encapsulating kind of small data values, it's a good idea to use struct. It's actually not that big of a deal in this case. Okay, similar to SignIn stuff, we'll declare static variables in this case, to use it directly with the class. There's no need to create a struct instance in this case. We will use this property to store our URL, and call it on the class itself whenever we need this URL. For the name of the property, it kind of stores a constant value, so we can use an all capitalized name, like storage, root, ref. Okay, good. Now we can just copy over the storage root reference in the auth service class where we handle the authentication stuff. Okay, great. Now in this SignUp method, we need to replace the hard-coded URL string by the storage root ref property of the config class. Actually, let's copy over the name of the property. Xcode hasn't been able to notice the change we made. Okay, good. Let's run the app to see if things still work fine. Later on, we'll put all reference stuff like this in the config struct. Alright, we'll learn how to dismiss keyboard and report authentication process next time. See you then!